big lots many times for subdivisions. We, decided instead of living closer to each other, which is the traditional way of doing, cities for thousands of years were built sustainable because they had to be sustainable. The only option we had was to walk or take public transit, even if it was horse-drawn public transit. But then the car came along, we threw out all those old ideas, and we knew a lot about building beautiful, functional, efficient, and sustainable cities, and we made a lot of mistakes. So Carmel, my city, was a car suburb. But I heard in my first election, 24 years ago now, over and over again, that people were desirous of a walkable, pedestrian-friendly city. Zoning that required all the commercial buildings to have ground floor retail, residential buildings that were multi-story to have ground floor retail, so people would actually walk somewhere they needed to go. So we have developed it. We were a little farming community, Quaker farming community that had 1,000 people after World War II. Today we're at 100,000 people, but we have designed our central area so that it's entirely walkable, bikeable, pedestrian-friendly. Our zoning requires mixed-use buildings. We know the mental and physical impacts of sprawl are not good. Just the mental and physical impacts of going above 5 or 6 stories, we know now, are not good, based on some research that's been done quite recently by Dr. Richard Jackson at UCLA. So we're back to the way Western Europe was built for centuries, and many other parts of the world were built for centuries before the car came along. We've added in our city, since I've been mayor, 1,200 acres of parkland. We virtually had now almost 300 acres of bike trails, but a center core of 30 blocks by 10 blocks or so that's walkable and pedestrian friendly. So that's the most important thing we've done, I think, is that city design. Those streets and those parks and the way we laid it out will be there for hundreds of years. Some of the maybe less important things we've done, 14 years ago, I issued an order requiring all of our city fleet to be hybrid or non-traditional fossil fuel vehicles. If they made, they didn't make fire trucks that were hybrids, then more and more will be able to actually carry out that executive order. We took our methane flame at the sewer plant, it was a byproduct of any sewage processing plant. We use it now to power the plant. We use geothermal for our water department, our recent buildings we've built. We are building energy centers in the downtown area, putting back the fuel by 50%. Why is it, Paul? Every time somebody mentions roundabout, it gets a laugh. I'm trying to figure that out. See, it happened again. We have built more roundabouts than any other city in the country. And people say, why do you do that? Well, because 20 years ago, we're a suburb of Indianapolis, or an edge city next to Indianapolis. We share a street. So 20 years ago in Indianapolis, an individual had a 1% chance of being in an injury accident every year. Carmel, 1% chance. It was the same. Today, Indianapolis, with virtually no roundabouts, it's still at 1%. We're at 0.2. We have lowered system-wide with our 116 roundabouts, 9 more being constructed this summer. We'll be down on virtually no stoplights. We have lowered our injury accident by 80%. They save money. That makes the conservatives happy. Compared to a stoplight, which costs $300 grand or so, plus electricity to run it, less sustainable again. But here's the big difference in the acceleration and having to stop. Our city engineer estimated last year that we're saving the public 272 fuel trucks per year. That's a real reduction in carbon and saves the public money. So we're looking at how we design our city. How do we inherently design it to make it more sustainable for the future? That's great.
First, thank you for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here. I get invited to a lot of conferences on climate issues. One, because I'm passionate about them and have been a leader on the issue, but the other because everybody wants to understand why Houston and how Houston. And I love following Mayor Brainerd because Houston is not zoned. And Houston is the sprawl capital of America. It's the largest city in America in terms of land mass. It's not a combined city-county metro. The city of Houston, fourth largest city in the United States, 640 square miles of city built around the car. And Houston is also the oil and gas capital of the world. Something north of 20% of the refining capacity of the United States is in Houston. So if you drove here in a vehicle, thank Houston. But at the same time, Houston is the largest municipal purchaser of renewable energy in America. And that was, I'm the middle mayor, but there's 3 mayors in a row that have made a public and very substantial commitment to purchasing renewable energy. And as a city, we have been aggressively leading on renewable energy issues, on working with other cities in terms of the best practices, conversion of fleets, conversion of streetlights. But I was mentioning earlier when I hadn't been mayor very long, and we started a conversion process of changing out the streetlights in the city of Houston. But we have 168,000 streetlights. So when we change streetlights and go to LED bulbs, it's a big deal and has a substantial impact. But one of the earliest environmental initiatives that I tried was to change out the light bulbs in 6,000 signalized intersections across the city of Houston. Just changing a light bulb from an incandescent bulb to an LED bulb. And we've done all the math. We figured out that it would pay for itself in about 7 years, the initial investment in going and changing the bulbs. But then I said, wait a minute, we need to rethink this. It costs about 7 times as much, but it lasts about 7 times as long. But when you factor in the cost of a human being in a bucket truck changing out every one of those light bulbs, when you factor in the cost of an out-of-service traffic signal, the return on investment is immediate. And as we began to look at services within the city of Houston, we found that often doing the right thing environmentally was also neutral, if not an improvement to our bottom line. I served on the steering committee for the C40 Climate Leadership Group for a long time, and I was at conferences around the world, and I would be on panels like this with mayors who would talk about tons of CO2 emissions and how they would make speeches to their constituents about climate action and how everyone needs to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I'll confess that I almost never had a conversation like that with my constituents. I would stand in front of my constituents and say, we're going to do this, this, and this, which will have an environmental impact, but we're doing it because it saves you money. We're doing it because it's best for the city's bottom line. I'm very much a believer in fighting battles that you have to fight, but if you can do a whole lot more without just keeping your head down and getting it done, I'm a believer in keeping your head down and getting it done. Why are we closing out this day with a panel of mayors? Because cities are where the most impressive work is being done on climate change at any governmental level anywhere in the world. And because cities are where the people are, so we have to take action in cities. Right now, 37 cities around the globe are home to 22% of global population. Just 37 cities. Led by Tokyo and Shanghai, which have 35 million people apiece. Think about a city that big. Currently, urban populations account for 50% of the global population. And the urbanization of the world, the in-migration to urban centers is accelerating really, really rapidly. So as go cities, so goes the rest of the planet. I look forward to more conversations. Thank you.
Well, I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I think I'm probably going to come from a little bit different mayor for 2.5 years, and in the middle of a water crisis. And so I've really been looking and focusing on things that have to do with environmental justice and human rights kinds of issues, and moving from that direction. So I thought about it, and I have 7 points that I really want to make sure I cover. What? But what I thought about was, I know it. I said, I want to make sure I don't forget this, but I really thought about it from the intersection of the Flint water crisis and climate change, and how those two things come together, because that's what I've been thrust into, actually. I got into office in November of 2015, and that following month, I declared an emergency for the city of Flint. And so that's what we've been talking about. So one of the things is, when I think about the roots of the Flint water crisis, you know, when I think about how that started, and when I think about the climate change, I know there's some things that just come to mind for me. And one is unfettered, unregulated pollution, myopic decision-making, displaced democracy, and making decisions based on finance and putting that over the health and well-being of people. That's one of the things, you know, that was the first thing that came to mind when I looked at how do these two things go together. I also thought about, in the context of climate change and water scarcity, because that's something that's going on right now, is water scarcity. And that's something that is really one of our most valuable resources, and that valuable resource is being threatened right now. It's gone from, you know, and it's really amazing to me, coming from Michigan, which is the Great Lakes state, and we have all of this, you know, access supposedly to fresh water, and being in Flint and not having access to that. So it's a precious resource, but now it's become a threatened resource. And Flint has become the epitome of that. This morning I was listening to someone, and we were talking about the situation with food and food insecurity, those kinds of things, and how when you look at climate change and what it's done as far as taking water away in agriculture and having less access to food, that's a huge challenge. When I was listening earlier this morning, I was listening to one of the farmers that was from Mississippi, and he was talking about how they could count it like clockwork in the month of May, that it would rain every day at a certain time almost. And when that changed as a result of the climate change, I don't know if he said he lost 60 or 65% of their crop. And so when I think about Flint and having access to fresh produce, and then when you lose some of your crop like that, the cost that's associated with it, and people not being able to afford it, that's an issue for us, especially in a water crisis when we know that proper diet helps mitigate the effects of lead. So that's something, and then living in a place that is noted for being a food desert. Those are huge challenges for us, and those are things that we are really paying attention to. I look at the fourth thing I wanted to make sure I talked about is this climate change and the crisis has really compelled us. It has compelled us. We better have some policies and practices that are in place that institutionalize conservation, you know, including proliferation of rain capture and stormwater management. We have to look at those kinds of issues and do something about that as well. And it also points to the need for community-led water planning and decision-making. The people that are most impacted by these decisions need to be the ones sitting at the table, having conversation and making decisions. And that's something that did happen in Flint. We were taken over by an emergency manager, and we had people making decisions for us and about us, not taking into consideration how this was going to impact us. So Flint went from a community of selling water. We're the largest city in the county. We used to sell water, and our water line was sold, our pipe was sold. So we went from selling water to buying water. So then you start thinking about the privatization of this resource. And we went, and really people don't know that our water issue was not lead poisoned water, but it was, once we had to start buying water, we were paying 8 times the national average. And so people that are in the community need to be the ones making the decisions about your water source and the direction that you want to go. And I think the other thing this has really done is really lifted us up to talk about water as a basic human right. And those are the things that we have to focus on. We've talked about water, clean water, access to water being a basic human right. And so as we move toward privatization, people are very fearful about having access to that. And I think last we need to look at holistic planning. That's something that didn't happen when we talk about what's going on with the water. We can't make decisions based only on profit being the bottom line in finances, because you see what happened. It's very dangerous when those kinds of things happen, because we had a community, we've had children that have been exposed to this lead, and some of them we don't know will have irreparable damage. We've had seniors with the same kinds of issues, and then there are all of those that are in between that are waiting to see what kind of issues and challenges do we face. And that's a concern. We've had people that die as a result of Legionnaires. And so we really have to take a close look at this. But I don't want to be doom and gloom, because we have done some great things in the city of Flint as a result, because one of the things we know is that when you have this kind of crisis, that opportunity comes. And so I want to let you know some of the things we've done, and I think I'll probably just start with talking about the Flint River, because we want to change the perception of that river. We want it to be a river walk. We want it to be a place where people come and gather together. And we know it wasn't the river that poisoned us. It was bad decisions made by our elected officials. That's what happened. And so between the Mott Foundation, the state, the county, and the city, we're in the process of, it started last year in April, a $30 million cleanup of the Flint River. So that's something that's going on. And I think that's something to make us proud about what we've been doing. Something else we're doing, and we want people to stay tuned, because it hasn't happened yet, but we've been pushing for new standards with that lead and copper rule. Right now it's 15 parts per billion. And while we all know that no lead is what we are striving for, what we are pushing for them to put in place is going from 15 for residential to 10 residential, and 5 parts per billion in schools. So we're waiting to hear back from the state on that. We're waiting to see what the EPA is going to say about that, because it really doesn't make sense that there are no standards in place for schools. There are no standards in place for schools, and the state was getting ready to leave. They wanted to leave in September. Legally, they could have. Then they said, okay, we're going to wait until the end of the year. And we said, you haven't tested our schools. How can you leave and not test the schools? And so we're really pushing for regulation in our schools and daycares and those kinds of places. So stay tuned. I hope I have a good message to bring you back on that one. And the model program for the schools. Those are things that we are putting in place right now. Something that also happened is, because of the situation in Flint, we went and requested a chief public health advisor. I remember I had gone to the White House, I had met with the president, and I said, I don't know what to call the position, but something like the Surgeon General we need for the city of Flint, because we didn't have a voice about our own health. And people didn't trust the county, the state, the federal government. And so what he did, and Catherine, you can wave your hand, because one of the people he sent is right here in the audience, right here from Madison. But he sent people to Flint to help us and to look at what kind of health concerns and issues the people were having. And after, I think it was about 6 months that we had people helping us, and we did get the funding to have a chief public health advisor. And so what we're doing is putting health in all policy making, and all decision making, and that was something that we weren't doing before. And in addition to having the health advisor, we also said we know the importance of physical fitness as far as this lead mitigating diet, and we got a recreation director, because we can't assume that kids are going to parks, that they're running and they're getting the physical fitness and activity that they need. And one of the other things we looked at is parks were disappearing. parks were disappearing, the importance of parks were disappearing in the city of Flint. And so between last year and this